WRAL investigates monster allegations of Medicaid fraud from multiple providers.
We think the numbers may be as high as a couple $100 million.
See all these Medicaid billing records? A WRAL investigation reveals one doctor tied to nearly 23,000 hours of Medicaid billing last year. I'd like to talk to you about your Medicaid billing. More than 60 hours a day. How is that possible?
Paid for by you, the taxpayer. WRAL investigates, tonight at 6.
166 hours of work in one day. That's impossible, but that's what state records show if you look at the Medicaid billing tied to a licensed therapist in Wake County. Thank you for joining us. I'm Deborah Morgan.
And I'm David Crabtree. WRAL Investigates spent weeks analyzing billing records of counseling agencies tied to just one psychologist. More than 10,000 entries just last year alone. And when connected, the pages of billing stretch 70 yards long.
Cullen Browder is here with a case that's hard to believe and a new tool the state is using to crack down on Medicaid fraud. Cullen?
Deborah and David, last year the state paid out about $10 billion in taxpayer-funded Medicaid claims covering everything from medical services to supplies for people who normally can't afford it. A viewer tip led us to counseling agencies and their questionable ties to just one therapist, and what we found simply doesn't add up. According to state Medicaid billing, psychologist Eunice Gadabaki works long hours. Hi, Dr. Gadabaki. Impossibly long hours. In these state billing records obtained by WRAL Investigates, Dr. Gadabaki's name is linked to 22,984 hours of therapy last year. Keep in mind, there are only 8,800 hours in an entire year. The state paid out $1.79 million in Medicaid money for Dr. Gadabaki alone. We're with WRAL TV. I'd like to talk to you about your Medicaid billing. Can you talk to us? According to the state records, you billed $1.8 million last year. That averages more than 60 hours a day. How is that possible? We finally caught up with Dr. Gadabaki after leaving messages at Amani Psychological Services, her Wake Forest-based agency. We went to her house. Would you like to say anything? We just want to make sure we're as fair as possible. Days later, her attorney contacted us. Brian Crawford concedes, of course Dr. Gadabaki didn't work those impossible hours, and she didn't get all that money either. He explains the doctor was hired by Rehoboth Consulting of Raleigh to oversee provisionally licensed providers. He says she signed off on therapy provided by other counselors, which these records reflect. But here's the problem. According to the state, providers listed in these billing statements must personally provide that service. In a statement, Gadabaki says there may have been some bills inadvertently billed under my provider number. Her attorney points out Rehoboth filed the reports. My name is Cullen Browder. I'm with WRAL TV. We called and sent emails looking for an explanation. So we went to get Rehoboth's side in person. Who from Rehoboth can I talk to? This woman came out. She tried to avoid us. We're with WRAL. By going in the passenger door, then climbing over to the driver's seat. Can I give you a card? The state wants answers about the billing as well. DHHS sent this letter on May 4th suspending Rehoboth's Medicaid payments because the agency determined a credible allegation of fraud exists for which an investigation is pending. Rehoboth CEO Lisa King Hodge later emailed us to say Rehoboth is cooperating with the state. Quote, "We have attempted to abide by all state rules and regulations and intend to correct any issues identified."
I think certainly it's a reasonable assumption that fraud has been committed for years, not only in North Carolina, but across the country.
Acting Health and Human Services Secretary Al Dalia won't comment specifically on Rehoboth or Gadabaki. He admits in the past, rooting out Medicaid fraud was nearly impossible for his agency. Was this a system just waiting to be taken advantage of?
Well, again, I think with a large and complicated system, there is a calculation that a criminal or a potential criminal will make. What are my chances of getting caught?
Those chances rose considerably when the state implemented a new fraud detection computer program from IBM. North Carolina is the first and only state in the country using it.
We think the numbers out of this first run may be as high as a couple $100 million or close to that of questionable costs.
What this tool does is it points the investigators in the right direction. It tells them where to look what rocks to look under, if you will.
IBM anti-fraud solutions leader Sean Berry points out with 88 million Medicaid claims coming into the state each year, that's a lot of rocks.
The state processes hundreds of millions of Medicaid claims every year. And the fraudsters, the true fraudsters, know this. And they take advantage of the volumes of large volumes of claims.
And Berry says counseling services are the #1 source for fraud.
As Jesse James used to say, why do I rob banks? Because that's where the money is. Well, that's why we analyze particular types of medical specialties. It's where the money is.
And we found plenty of taxpayer money paid on behalf of Dr. Garabaki last June. 17 days with more than 100 hours of billing, topping out at 166 hours billed on June 14th alone. Records show Garabaki provided services that day for 2 agencies in 6 different counties, 2.5 hours each in Orange, Person, and Halifax, 5 hours in Cumberland, 75 in Wake, and 78 hours in Durham. The total state payout for that one day, $12,290. Those June numbers took a huge bump mainly because of billing by yet another agency, North Carolina Behavioral Health and Counseling, based out of this unmarked office in Fayetteville. Through her attorney, Garabaki tells us, quote, I categorically deny any knowledge of the firm, its principals, or agents. I have never contracted or worked for the firm in question. Well, it turns out this case is not the only one under suspicion. DHHS now has red flagged about 200 providers.
If you are a provider trying to rip off the system, it's a new day, and we will know who you are. We will come after you.
Now, we tried contacting the registered owner of North Carolina Behavioral Health looking for answers. We have not heard back. DHHS also confirms that agency hasn't provided any invoices to support the questionable billing. Deborah.
Colin, this is just mind-blowing. Did taxpayers ever pay for counseling that never happened?
Well, that is the ultimate question here. Dr. Garabaki says she merely signed off on that therapy for Rehoboth, but she had no connection at all to NC Behavioral. The records linked to her also show therapy every day of the year last year, every holiday and weekend, except for just 3 days. We'll keep digging into this case and, of course, others, and we're told at least 10 provider cases have now been turned over to the Attorney General's office.
Wow. All right, Colin, thanks for this WRAL investigation.
The state is providing more details tonight on its effort to crack down on Medicaid fraud. Today, the state announced 10 cases involving therapy providers are now in the hands of the Attorney General. Cullen Browder is here now with more on the crackdown and reaction to a WRAL investigation into one case that caught the state's eye. Cullen?
David, the Department of Health and Human Services is now looking at 206 providers all across the state with unusual Medicaid billing, most of them right here in the Triangle. 103 of those cases right here in the Raleigh area. There are 43 cases when you look in the Charlotte region, and then if you move over to Greenville, there are 24 potential fraud cases in those surrounding counties. As we highlighted last night, these cases can be complicated. There are paperwork questions. State lawmakers tell us taxpayer money is on the line here. Hi, Dr. Garabaki. The impossible Medicaid billing numbers linked to psychologist Eunice Garabaki through counseling agencies don't sit well with state leaders.
People should be outraged.
Well, it does make you angry.
WRAL Investigates obtained records that show nearly 23,000 billed hours linked to that one therapist last year, more than 60 hours averaged a day, $1.79 million paid by taxpayers.
Well, it's outrageous.
And those are dollars that aren't there to treat older, sick people or children.
Governor Bev Perdue credits the IBM software that's helped the state flag 200 providers and close to $200 million.
We're not going to put up with it. If you're a doctor or a nurse or somebody in a healthcare arena and you know what's going on and you overprescribe and get folks to do this or falsify billing, we're going to come after you. We're going to put you in jail.
But Representative Nelson Dollar, who chairs the DHHS Oversight Committee, says action is long overdue.
The department needs to accelerate their efforts, and I think that the IBM solution on this needs to begin to show some real results.
And sorting out the billing is complicated. Dr. Garabaki tells us she merely signed off on other providers' work for Rehoboth Consulting. The doctor also denies any knowledge or connection to North Carolina Behavioral Health, which used her name for $676,000 in claims. As investigations build, lawmakers share one goal.
We need to make sure not one dime of taxpayer money is being wasted.
And as the state digs into the more than 200 questionable cases out there, as you said, 10 have already been turned over to the Medicaid fraud unit within the Attorney General's office. Dave.
WRAL investigates a new trail of questionable Medicaid billing. 4 months after we found $200 million in possible fraud, we find a new company billing 22 hours a day.
Can you explain any of this?
We ask how this is happening.
When we find one, we generally find more than one. It's kind of like cockroaches.
And what is being done about it.
It is a massive taxpayer-funded system that investigators warn can be a target for fraud.
$12 billion a year is spent on Medicaid in North Carolina. 88 million claims for everything from counseling to medical care. WRAL Investigates has spent months tracking suspicious billing in the system.
Cullen Browder joins us now with another Triangle Counseling agency that is in question. Cullen?
Well, David and Deborah, just consider how big the Medicaid system is. It's so big that state leaders say they simply can't verify 88 million claims a year, so they've turned to a software program for help. To date, the Department of Health and Human Services has referred 35 cases to the Attorney General for criminal investigation. Those cases account for $21 million in Medicaid money. Tonight, more Medicaid billing that doesn't add up. WRAL's ongoing investigation of questionable Medicaid billing led us here to North Carolina Behavioral Health and Counseling in Durham. We're with WRAL TV. Could you talk to us? After several unanswered phone calls, we caught up with Behavioral's registered CEO, Tracy Clay, outside. Here's the reason we wanted to talk with her. Her agency billed Medicaid for more than $712,000 in counseling services in 2011. 3,200 therapy sessions, 7,900 hours. That's nearly 22 hours a day, every day of the year, all billed in the name of just one psychologist. In May, we reported on Medicaid billing attributed to Dr. Eunice Garabaki, who averaged about 60 hours a day. Through her attorney, the psychologist says she simply reviewed progress notes and advised other therapists for Rehoboth Consulting in Raleigh. DHHS rules dictate the billing name must be the actual counselor providing that service. In a statement, Garabaki's attorney tells us, quote, Rehoboth Consulting Agency did the billing, and she thought the billing was being done correctly. Any suggestion that she knowingly billed improperly or knowingly helped others bill improperly is wrong. As for North Carolina Behavioral, the doctor says she never even heard of the agency, and she's angry and concerned the business used her provider number for all of its Medicaid billing. Dr. Garabaki says she has no idea what your agency is, and yet you're using her to bill Medicaid. Can you explain any of this?
There are spider webs of connections among providers and among people who make referrals to providers. So when we find one, we generally find more than one. It's kind of like cockroaches.
DHHS Secretary Al Dalia won't talk about specific provider cases. Through a public records request, we found his agency shut off Medicaid funding for North Carolina Behavioral last month, citing a credible allegation of fraud. It's one of more than 200 flagged by the state's new computer software designed to catch questionable billing. Several of the cases were referred to the Attorney General's office, and Dr. Garabaki's attorney says she's offered to cooperate fully.
Not only have we referred more cases than in the past, they have accepted a far higher percentage of those cases. It's a very, very high percentage of those cases for criminal investigation.
We're just trying to get the truth here. We're just trying to get your side is all we're asking for. Tracy Clay did not answer our questions that day in the parking lot. We went to this new home in Person County, registered in Clay's name. Her family's Mercedes and Cadillac Escalade, which just showed up on her tax records last year, sat in the driveway, but no one answered the door. Clay later drove by us outside of her business to take our picture, but again, she didn't stop to talk about that billing. It's now up to state investigators to decide if her case and about 200 others warrant criminal charges.
We're coming after people very quickly and very aggressively.
Now, we tried contacting Tracy Clay again today. We still haven't been able to get her side of what $700,000 in taxpayer money paid for. David.
Colin, obviously the state is very busy with all these investigations, but where does this investigation stand?
Well, they tell us that they have audited about half of the billing when it comes to the counseling services, but leaders tell us they're now deciding which Medicaid program to investigate next. Again, so far, just the counseling services.
Long way to go. Cullen, thank you. And to see our past stories on Medicaid billing, go to WRAL.com, keyword investigates.